Welcome to the 3030 Health Podcast. The following discussion is for education and entertainment. It is not intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first discussing it with your doctor. Here is your host, Dr. Ruiz.
Hello, everyone. Super excited for another show of the 3030 Health Podcast here with my co-host, Adam Sadowski. Adam, how are you?
I'm doing great, Guillermo. How are you?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. Just, I'm hoping to release this after PFX. So for anyone that's new to the podcast, how are you guys doing? I hope you had fun at PaleoFX. And for all my listeners and people that I said hello at PaleoFX, hey, how are you?
Awesome. It was so cool. How over my spring break, I was able to come down to Arizona, and I was able to observe all the wonderful doctors at Integrative Health. I got to talk with Dr. Alan Christensen. I learned an immense amount of information regarding just everything, really. And I was so grateful for you to give me that opportunity and for all the wonderful discussions we had. And it's actually really funny how we actually didn't even podcast while I was down there.
I know it was crazy because we're so busy in clinic, and we did a mini hike. And so what did you learn, man? What did you learn coming down here to Arizona?
Oh my goodness, I learned a ton. I learned a lot from an endocrinology standpoint. I haven't even had my endocrinology block, so this was an amazing primer for that. And just seeing sort of the clinical relevance of things, patterns to look for in lab tests, the questions patients will have. I learned the business aspect of running a clinic and all that. And it was just an incredible experience seeing so many patients, day in, day out, and just the amazing work that you guys were able to do. And then just, the work didn't stop after clinic. We don't just come home and then kind of just chill. We are still doing things. I know that you had a bunch of interviews that you were doing with the 3030 podcast. We were doing some research, and it's awesome seeing where this chapter of our lives are going.
Yeah, and school is awesome, and you learn so much at school, but learning doesn't stop once you get that degree. And having that experience of a real life practice is just insane. I average about 8 to 12 patients a day, and being able to handle all that information, and then I'm a small fish in a really big pond within the health space. So you got to hustle getting back, home and whether preparing for a presentation. I did have a big conference that weekend where you were here before you left, and then, trying to prepare lunch and, ironing clothes and, everything adds up. But it's, I am just so grateful to be busy because the opposite would suck.
Right. No, it's funny. The Rock, the wrestler and the actor, Dwayne Johnson, he has actually a really interesting quote. I'd rather be too busy than to be 23 and broke on my mother's couch.
Yeah. And speaking on the aspect of the business part, I've said it before on the podcast. Sean Croxton told me, don't be a broke ass naturopath. And with this high risk, high reward profession, where I opted myself to be outside of the insurance model, having that first person experience on the cash based system and how it breaks down so many barriers for the patient when it comes to ordering labs or adhering to protocols. It is just so important. Now, I'm not saying that this cash-based system is the only way, just like, naturopathic medicine is not the only way. It's the path that I chose. But being able to see it in first person and realizing how important and how committed my patients are, I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And it's awesome to not have, I don't want to say shackles, but for lack of a better term, the shackles of the insurance model that they give you. If insurance is great if you have an awesome insurance plan, but a lot of people either can't afford that or they don't have that. So if you have amazing insurance, there's a lot less hassle, but it's so frustrating as a doctor when you want to give someone some sort of protocol or go see a physical therapist for X amount of time, but that might not be granted to that patient because of what their insurance covers.
Another aspect that we discussed a lot was the whole concept of meeting the patient where they are. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was kind of funny. Before I came to shadow the docs at Integrative Health and shadowing you, I was on the mindset that, and I still kind of am, that you should meet the patient where they're at. So if you're having someone who's, eating cereal for breakfast and a pizza at lunch and then a hamburger at dinner, well, maybe we should meet them where they're at and say, don't have a whole pizza, have a slice of pizza. But then when I saw what you guys were doing and just kind of seeing the drastic change you can have in sort of okay, this is what we're doing approach, but at the same time respecting the patient's autonomy, the results that I saw with you guys were pretty crazy, because you didn't give, it's not like, I don't want to say ultimatum, but the way that you address the situation, you were like, let's get this in control and then we can go from there, rather than kind of dull it out over a period of 6 months. Let's just help you get better now.
And again, going back to the system that I'm part of, and we talked to a couple of patients like outside of the consult room, and they were so gracious to give us, what their thoughts. And the patients that I'm seeing are ready to change. They might have been to other naturopaths or other doctors, and they're arriving at our clinic ready for a drastic change, and they want to get better yesterday. So it's way easier for me to say, okay, we're going to do this for the next 4 weeks. Okay, we're going to be doing this for the next 2 weeks. We're going to retest. And this is the plan, and this is where I see the progress going. Again, this is special to my practice because my practice has created its own niche, and it has a huge following. And, all these patients are coming to us expecting results now. And it allows me to be a little bit more cavalier with my recommendations. Whereas, if I was like at a free clinic, with Naturopaths Without Borders, my approach would be completely different. Because these patients maybe don't know that I'm a paleo guy. Since it's a free clinic, there's very little skin in the game. And when you have a cash practice, there's a lot of skin in the game. And it's funny because when we talk about this type of models, of models of practice, I kind of like envision this. And maybe I put it out there, and that's how I ended up at this clinic or whatever. But this is exactly how I envisioned my practice. And it's funny because, in naturopathic medicine, we learn, remove obstacles to health. And we also learn, to start with the basics. Sleep more, eat clean, exercise, meditation, and all of those things like kind of build the foundation to better health. But when I'm with my patients and I go, okay, you need to start eating better, or you need to meditate, maybe go gluten-free, the patient is going to be, yeah, I've been doing that for the past 3 years. Now what? So it's completely a different change of mindset.
Right. Awesome.
So enough about that. Let's get to the meat and potatoes of this show. We have 3 different things that we want to talk about today. And Adam, why don't you start us off?
Yeah. So one question was, why should someone consider or look into Nigella sativa and or low-dose naltrexone for their hypothyroidism?
Nigella sativa, and well, let's start with hypothyroidism, and quick brief discussion on Graves' disease, or Graves' or Hashimoto's disease. So Hashimoto's, the most common form of thyroid disease. It starts as an attack, autoimmune attack on your thyroid. So maybe you have toxic metals, maybe you have food allergies, maybe you have a chronic infection, and your body is overreacting, creating autoimmune antibodies, and those antibodies kind of lodge into your thyroid, and it makes it lousy. So you have hypothyroidism, Graves' disease, same physiological problem, except that those autoimmune antibodies cannot turn on your thyroid, and then you have hyperthyroidism. So we can do a bunch of things for like hypothyroid. We can do supplementation, we can do different botanicals, or we can do desiccated thyroid hormone. And the desiccated thyroid hormone will improve your hormone status. You're taking an exogenous form of hormone, and you're going to start feeling better. The problem comes when you start dosing the thyroid hormone. If you don't remove the obstacle to cure, meaning the thing that's making you produce those antibodies, that autoimmune problem is going to continue, and that attack on your thyroid is going to continue. So having a good thyroid hormone balance is very important for symptomology. But if you don't address those autoimmune antibodies, that attack on your thyroid is going to progress, and that's when you start seeing nodules. That's when you start seeing changes in the ecotexture of your thyroid, and that in itself can create problems. Ultimately, you can develop the nodules, and those nodules could be cancerous. So low-dose naltrexone has been used, and it's commonly seen in the web space as a form of reducing those antibodies. And low-dose naltrexone works by binding to certain receptors in your brain, and these receptors cause it decreases inflammation, and it has been touted to decrease autoimmune antibodies. Okay, naltrexone is used to kind of block the pathway of your cannabinoid receptors in your brain, and it's used to wean you off of drugs that bind to these cannabinoid receptors. So the idea with low-dose naltrexone is that you are binding to some of these cannabinoid receptors, and your body kind of gets curious of why your endogenous cannabinoid response is not working, and it upregulates endogenous cannabinoids. Now, the cannabinoids can modulate your immune response. Like, for example, a full dose of naltrexone is 50 milligrams to 150 milligrams per day. And with low-dose naltrexone, we're looking at a dose of like 1.5 milligrams and then you ramp it up until you get to 4.5 or lower on the dose. And it's a compounded drug, very inexpensive. Unfortunately, in my clinical practice, I haven't seen it work that well. Now, yeah, go ahead.
Have you seen anybody's antibodies completely resolve to the point where they've reversed their hypothyroidism?
I'm pretty sure Dr. Lauren Beersley, who you shadow, is not going to mind me telling this story. After she graduated from medical school, she was feeling tired, not a lot of mental clarity. So she started working on her adrenals, and that wasn't panning out. So she decided to test herself for thyroid, and she found out that she was Hashimoto's. Okay. At the time, her antibodies were in the 3 digits, like 600s.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And by doing some food allergy testing and by doing some exogenous thyroid hormone, she has been able to completely reverse her thyroid antibodies. The funny thing is that we always think about gluten, dairy, and eggs as being the biggest factors towards gut and intestinal inflammation. For Dr. Beersley, her biggest needle mover was removing sesame seeds.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so random. Now, if you attended SC&M, we have a really cool restaurant called Princess, which is like half a block away from the school, and it's a Mediterranean restaurant, and they use a lot of sesame seed oil. So maybe that was affecting her. Also, most of the people that are presenting to our clinic with hypothyroidism that has been undiagnosed happen to come to the clinic after a very stressful episode in their lives. Most of the time is having a baby. It's super, super stressful. In Dr. Beersley's case, She had just finished medical school, and that can be super, super stressful. So maybe, the stress compounded with her allergy kind of like made her become hypothyroid. But yeah, so that's a very clear example, and we see it day in and day out. Another thing that we do at the clinic is get a first visit when you're diagnosed with Hashimoto's. We give you an ultrasound order to make sure we document the state of your thyroid, because 9 times out of 10, if you adhere to the program and you're able to lower your antibodies and you're able to identify the root cause for those antibodies, after 6 or 12 months, we can reverse that thyroid damage and that thyroid becomes euthyroid, or like a normal thyroid. Now, once your thyroid is normal, that doesn't mean that you can go back to your bad habits. It's just that you are in less danger of developing nodules and developing, those precancerous lesions.
So will those nodules essentially go away once the antibodies go down, and will you also have to still be on medication after?
As the thyroid gets healthier, we are able to reduce the dose of thyroid hormone. That's kind of important because that can gauge your progress within your health. We have some patients that have been able to get completely rid of their thyroid hormone, but I like to have an honest conversation with my patients about how we shouldn't measure our health with the amount of pills that we are taking, because having that little thyroid hormone can be the difference between living like a hermit, and not having stress, having to go to bed at 8 and then wake up as late as you can, and having to eat a perfectly clean diet, versus having a normal life, meaning with work and all those stressors that you cannot control. That little thyroid pill, even if it's on the lower doses, you're talking about like 16.25 milligrams or thyroid, it buffers some of that extra stress and allows you to live a normal, hectic life.
Yeah, and I think that there's sort of this stigma around people who take medication. You shouldn't be ashamed of being on a medication, especially if it's, helping you out to a high degree. So I think, like, yeah, you could try and optimize your lifestyle all you want, but just because you're taking a medication doesn't mean you're necessarily unhealthy.
Correct. So back to the low dose naltrexone. I have stated before, we do have some patients that do take LDN because it works for them, but I personally prefer using other things, like, for example, Nigella sativa. And I'll put a link to the on the show notes about how they found that Nigella sativa can lower antibodies. But again, it's not like taking the Nigella or taking the LDN is curative, because in reality, it's buffering, okay? And more important than buffering would be identifying what is your immune system reacting to. And by all means possible, try to eliminate that insulting factor. So that can look like many different things. That can look like doing some food allergy testing. That could be doing an elimination diet for about 30 days and then reintroducing things and seeing how you react. That could mean, looking for chronic infections, looking for gastrointestinal infections, or even toxic metals. And by eliminating all of those things and making sure that your immune system is solid, that can help you reverse those antibodies, and maybe you can stop taking the LDN or the Nigella, and that's curative. So a couple of things that I have seen is, like the number one thing that I see is food allergies. And depending on the age of the patient.
Are we talking about food allergies or food sensitivities?
Well, food sensitivities. Depending on the age of the patient, then we can start creating a rubric for investigation. or or even the location of a patient. For example, if I have like a 30-year-old female patient, I might start by doing an elimination diet or testing for food sensitivities. If I have a 30-year-old son patient from Flint, Michigan, I might look into lead toxicity. So does that make sense? It depends. Like an older patient that has lived in the Southwest for all their lives with asthma or, those types of symptoms, I might be looking more at coccidomycosis or valley fever. If it's a patient from the Northeast that has like flu-like symptoms and fatigue, maybe I would, veer more towards Lyme disease. And by doing that simple triage, we can identify things that could be big needle movers and help our patients reduce the insulting factors and then help them reverse those antibodies.
Right. Awesome.
Also, before we move on to the next subject, nutritional deficiencies. That's another big thing. For example, vitamin D. I like to keep my patients between 60 and 80 nanograms per deciliter. I don't think that vitamin D, the more you take, the better. And that's another immune modulator. Good iron status, and the iron is, super important to fight infections and also for thyroid peroxidase in order to be able to have a better functioning thyroid. So nutritional deficiencies is a big needle mover, and those can be supplemented in the short term, but having a solid diet can fix that without supplementation.
Right, and I don't think we actually even told our listeners what Nigella sativa is.
No, we haven't. It's black cumin seed oil. Nigella sativa, actually, it's a Middle Eastern kind of like panacea tonic. It's used for coughs mainly, but it's a very potent immunomodulator. And I'll have a link to the study and maybe some of the products that are at a good strength and most importantly not tainted or have been certified to be actually Nigella sativa, because you can get it pretty inexpensively, but a lot of those products might be either cut or might be contaminated, and that's why they're so inexpensive.
And I can also send you a link to another study I actually just read on Friday regarding vitamin D. With those supplementations, they had 3 supplements from 3 different companies, and each one had a different amount of vitamin D, and it wasn't necessarily what the label had said. So one actually had almost twice as much as it actually proclaimed to have, and the others, one had slightly more, and then another one also had more. So you have to be careful.
Were those oral or injectables?
One was oil-based, so the droppers that you would put on the tongue. One was a tablet, and then one was a capsule.
Wow. So all of them oral.
Yes.
Yeah, and again, we do recommend our patients get vitamin D from the sun because your body will modulate how much you need. But sometimes, if you are in the low 20s, supplementation for a short amount of time can be pretty life-changing and help you with a bunch of different things. And if you have a chance to buy a product that has vitamin D and K2, the K2 helps modulate where the calcium goes, and it helps you put the calcium in the right place. So having a product with vitamin D and K2, it's way better than just vitamin D.
It's not necessarily a question, but the next topic that we wanted to talk about was type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, I've been geeking out a little bit on type 2 diabetes. Yeah, I do work at an endocrinology clinic, and it is always present in my head. Now, the type of patient that we see usually doesn't have this problem because, they're pretty health conscious. But every once in a while, we do see a patient where the A1C, it's kind of like trending in the wrong direction. What the A1C is, it's an analysis, a blood analysis that looks at your red blood cell and sees how much sugar that red blood cell has accumulated over the past, around 3 months. And it's interesting because the more I look at A1C as a marker for diabetes, the more like disappointed I get, because different types of diets or different conditions can make your A1C lie or can make your A1C not tell the right story. For example, if you are doing a ketogenic diet where you're using less sugar and more ketones, your red blood cells are going to be less likely to encounter those glucose molecules. So then the lifespan of that red blood cell is going to be longer than 3 months. And when they check it under the microscope, it's going to look like it has accumulated more, but the reason is because it has been circulating around your body longer. So your A1C might say 5.6 or something along those lines. And you're like, hey, I check my glucose every day and I hardly ever go over 86. Well, the reason could be that because of the low amount of blood glucose, your red blood cells tend to live longer. That's a good thing because we do use stem cells to create red blood cells, and using less of your stem cells is a good thing. On the other hand, if you have incredibly high levels of oxidation or a blood disease, or you're super inflamed, those red blood cells might not be lasting. They might not be lasting the whole 3 months. So then your A1C is going to be falsely decreased. And another reason why you could have falsely decreased A1C would be blood donations, because you're getting rid of a bolus of those red blood cells. So you're creating new red blood cells that are new and they haven't circulated, and now your average is kind of skewed. Or having high levels of iron, or even taking supplements such as garlic. Garlic is a potent red blood cell lyser, so it breaks down red blood cells, and taking garlic supplements can falsely decrease your level of A1C. And I will put a paper on the show notes about this. But what is type 2 diabetes? So if we think about our evolution and how we are able to handle different types of fuel substrates, we can get a pretty cool explanation on why our body decides to become insulin resistant and try to store glucose in our bloodstream. So think about it, you're a caveman, you're walking around the earth, and then you encounter an apple orchard. Okay, so you're a hunter-gatherer, and hunting is dangerous, and you have free fruit that can be easily obtained, okay? So we start eating all this fruit, and our body, starts converting some of that fruit into fat. Because if you increase that blood glucose too high and you maintain it over a very long period of time, that is very inflammatory. So you start creating this fat storage, and fat is very stable and you can access it in a later date. The problem is that when you're doing that, that orchard is going to be around for a month. That fruit is going to spoil, and then after that, you won't have access to those freely available carbohydrates. So you have to go back to hunting. In our present society, we can have carbohydrates and fruit and high fructose corn syrup. And, we talked about how our intestines handle high fructose corn syrup a couple of episodes ago. All year long, always. We are never in a place where we are kind of like skinny on the calories, or we are kind of like in a starvation mode. So with this free flow of energy, we have to do something about this energy. We try to put this energy into the mitochondria, and we try to make fat. We're trying to do all these different things. Now, specifically with glucose, whenever you eat some glucose and it goes into your intestines, and your intestines kind of like do their thing and then shuttle it into your bloodstream, that glucose needs insulin in order to open the door into your cell. It's called a GLUT4 receptor. And that piece of glucose goes inside, and it goes through the Krebs cycle and then ends in your mitochondria. When the mitochondria kind of starts making fuel or ATP, anytime you do you convert that glucose into ATP, there is some garbage, or you're creating some exhaust from that mitochondria in the form of reactive oxygen species. And this reactive oxygen species, just like ozone or like oxidants, they can be harmful to the cell. And I like to talk about it like within your cell. Just imagine your cell is the car garage, and your mitochondria is the car. And if you run a car inside a garage with the garage door closed for long enough, you're going to intoxicate yourself and you're going to die. So same thing with the mitochondria. If it continues pushing glucose through the Krebs cycle and ultimately to the electron transport chain through the mitochondria, creating reactive oxygen species, those reactive oxygen species are going to end up damaging the cell and killing you. So the body doesn't want to die, and evolutionarily, it shuts off the GLUT4 receptors, so you cannot have any more glucose coming into the mitochondria. Okay, so then the body starts circulating glucose in your bloodstream. So think of it like this: you have an airport, and you're having glucose is airplanes landing on the airport, and at some point you get so saturated with planes coming in that it becomes dangerous, and you send an order to the control tower to have those airplanes circulating. Okay, so circulating airplanes is dangerous because eventually they're going to run out of fuel, but it is more dangerous to have them land and create, a catastrophe, those planes landing. So the funny thing about this whole thing is that the way we deal with type 2 diabetes is by making you more sensitive to insulin, which would be like at some point looking up at the sky and saying, oh, there's so many planes. That's a problem. Let's have them land and crash, and it doesn't matter as long as there's no planes circulating. Same thing. You can have so much glucose circulating, and what do? We give you metformin, or we give you, in extreme cases, we can give you insulin to try to minimize the amount of sugar in the blood system. Now, the problem, is that the evolutionary adaptation that we have to protect us from this reactive oxygen species has been bridged. So this reactive oxygen species began to attack cells, and that's how we end up with neuropathy. That's how we end up with, infections, and that's how we end up damaging tissues. So what's the problem? The problem is not the circulating glucose. The problem is not the GLUT4 receptor shutdown or insulin insensitivity. The problem is that you're probably eating too much fuel.
And that can come from any source.
Yes, because there's people that eat nothing but carbohydrates, i.e. fruitarians, and they don't develop type 2 diabetes. And there's people that eat nothing but keto, and they don't develop type 2 diabetes. And there are people that eat a mix that don't develop type 2 diabetes. So the idea is to consume less calories than needed in order to prevent the accumulation of reactive oxygen species within each individual cell. By reducing calories, by creating a good plan to minimize the spillage of fuel, that's how we truly can reverse type 2 diabetes. Now, there are things that make it seem like you're controlling your blood glucose, like, for example, berberines, or cinnamon, or chromium, or vanadium, or like we talked about, garlic. All of those things are going to maximize your insulin sensitivity, meaning that you're going to be able to shuttle the glucose into the mitochondria. But that's not really removing the obstacle to health, because the obstacle to health is removing the excess fuel. The only way to actually fix type 2 diabetes and be able to get away from metformin and be able to get away from this insulin sensitizing supplements is by reducing your fuel intake, so changing your diet, and and also increasing your exercise activity, increasing movement, and and optimizing different hormones such as your thyroid, because that's going to influence your basal metabolic rate. And by doing those things in conjunction with sleeping well and meditation, and all of those things that are so helpful for your insulin response, now you can have true cure for type 2 diabetes.
Even though, exercising more and eating less is such a simple thing to say, we've discussed this very similar aspect in a previous podcast that we did. And, there are other factors that are contributing to why one person may eat more or less than another person. And we discussed, phenomenal research to look at, such as Stefan Guillenet's The Hungry Brain and Rob Wolf's Wired to Eat. So if you guys, want another resource to check out that. Check out the other podcasts we talked about for a topic very similar to this.
And it's not to say that metformin and other insulin sensitizing supplements are not useful. They are very useful in the short term, because having high levels of glucose circulating in your body can be very irritating, and it can cause problems. And we want to minimize that damage as fast as possible. Other things that help you reduce your glucose in your bloodstream are things like alpha lipoic acid and carnitine. I mentioned vanadium, chromium, berberines. All of those things help reduce the amount of glucose in your bloodstream, and that's good. But they are not curative. They are not something to be relied on. Because what you will find out is that if you don't remove the obstacle to cure or the underlying cause for your high blood glucose, the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to continue increasing the amount of metformin or the amount of supplements that you're taking, up until a point that those supplements don't work anymore, and then you're going to have to switch to injecting insulin. A couple of things, oxidative damage is such a causative factor for insulin resistance. In the lab, you can take a petri dish with cells, and you can spray ozone, meaning reactive oxygen species, and those cells automatically become insulin resistant. So minimizing anything that is oxidative to your body is going to help you become more insulin sensitive. That's why smoking can be a factor in diabetes. Being exposed to toxic chemicals can be a factor in diabetes. In all of those oxidative stressors can predispose you to diabetes. And then finally, in order to get a good knowledge of what to look for, or what to how to gauge if you are trending in the wrong direction, couple of things you can do is just look in the mirror. Do you look the way you want to look? Are you storing extra fat in places that you don't want to? And then some labs that you can check, your CBC, a BMP, to check your liver status, to check your kidney status, making sure that you don't have excess iron, because iron can be very oxidative. And there's as a segue, there's a great paper of people that had hemochromatosis and type 2 diabetes, and they were able to reverse that type 2 diabetes by doing iron chelation. So just by reducing the levels of iron in their body, they were able to reduce type 2 diabetes without any need for medication. Again, iron is very oxidative, same mechanism of action. And then a fasting blood glucose and a fasting insulin. And that can really clear up the confusion of what's going on. Because if you have like a seemingly elevated A1C, but your morning insulin is low, I wouldn't worry too much about it, especially if your triglycerides look good, if your lipids look good, if you have been keeping track of your of random glucose or even fasting glucose. If all of those things look good, and then your A1C doesn't look that hot, as long as you have a low fasting insulin, I wouldn't worry too much. And at the same time, having that morning fasting glucose and that morning fasting insulin. And if your A1C is looking all right, in the 5.3s, 5.4s, but your fasting insulin is elevated, then I would start digging and seeing if you're really overdoing it and it's a false negative A1C.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it's a ton to unpack, and type 2 diabetes is just so peculiar because I remember the first time I really started to dig into this type 2 diabetes story was after watching Chris Masterjohn video on AHS. I think it was 2013. I'll make sure to put a link on the show notes. And he started describing this oxidative stress theory to type 2 diabetes. And it makes evolutionary sense. Patients might think, or people might think, oh, it's type 2 diabetes. I can reverse it or I can conquer it. Diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, it's kind of like a big deal, and you do have to change your lifestyle. And it's not like once your A1Cs and your blood glucose are controlled that you can revert back to the lifestyle that led you to type 2 diabetes. In fact, in that video, Master John mentions that after your triglycerides hit a certain level, and I think it's in the 300s, you create some micro damage to your pancreas where your pancreas won't be able to tolerate that level of glucose anymore. So you lose a little bit of the ability to secrete enough insulin. Uncovering that disease process might put you in a category where you might have to, for the rest of your life, kind of be conscious about your intake of fuel. Now, this is not 100% of the people. This is not, this is just in general being super cautious and not falling back into the same habits that led you to this disease state.
All right. Well, I think we nailed that one.
Yeah, I think we kicked that horse enough.
Yeah. So what do you have going on for the rest of the day?
I'm just gonna watch some Westworld, and then I'm going to. I've been doing I do it a couple of times a year. I do like a 3-day fast. I've talked about how I fast once a week, and my Fridays are usually 24-hour fasts. Every once in a while, a couple of times a year, I do a 3-day bone broth fast. So I'm on day 3, so I'm about to go eat a big meal.
How you feeling?
So yesterday, my glucose went to 64. I was feeling a little bit dizzy, and I was feeling a little bit like hypoglycemic. I usually can dip into the 60s and be completely symptom-free. But for some reason, I don't know why, yesterday it was crazy, man. And I pounded some electrolytes, and that seemed to have perked me right up. Don't do this at home. It's looking back, that was kind of dumb. But I've done it before, and it's kind of like a fasting mimicking diet because I do intake calories. I do eat, some bone broth throughout the day, but I shouldn't be doing this, man. I'm dumb, because my family does have a history of hypothyroidism. And doing fast like this kind of like messes with your hormones. And I need to go get, a good set of labs and figure out if I am really, going into that direction, because it's incredible the amount of stress that we put ourselves through with school. And I can see how, by doing all this dumb stuff that I'm doing, I could be putting myself in danger of becoming hypothyroid.
Yeah, that sounds pretty intense, man.
It's not that bad. I'm pretty well keto adapted, and being able to have that metabolic flexibility keeps me on my toes. And guess what? My mental clarity is insane.
That's good. I think one of the hardest parts of fasting is that mental component. as long as you have it, it seems like people can handle it pretty okay.
Yeah, and have you ever done an extensive fast?
I've done, I think, a 3-day before, but just with school and studying, I definitely don't want to have to do that during the school year. It would probably be, after I take my board exams and I'm able to actually relax and just kind of, just chill and not have to really think about anything. Because if I do it during school, I don't want to have an episode of hypoglycemia while in the clinic or while trying to study for a final exam or something, because that would not turn out well.
During this 3-day fast that I'm doing right now, I just lay around the whole day. I try to sleep as much as I can. I try to hydrate as much as I can. It's not like I'm going and killing a CrossFit WOD. It's not like, I'm off from work for 3 days. So I take advantage of that. So it's not like I'm pushing the limits. It's more like I'm more like a keyboard warrior trying to finish, slide sets and use different projects that I have going on. So it's not like I'm running or doing anything extraneous, because that would kill me.
Right. So yeah, and it just goes to show the importance of doing it under medical supervision if a doctor is already complaining about having some sort of side effect. So
yeah, no,
don't just go out and do it on yourself.
Don't be a dummy. Don't do it. Don't do it without the medical supervision. Let me talk about why I'm doing this, okay? So a couple of things. I do believe that I have some sort of like dysbiosis, and without having to take any herbals or take any prescription antibiotics, a good way that I've found to keep them at bay is to do this periodic 3-day fasts in order to kind of like modulate their growth. It also keeps me on my toes with my metabolic flexibility. If I go a period of time eating like crap, where I start like gaining weight and my body composition is not looking the way that I want it, I can do this fast reset and kind of like just like a shock to the system, and then start over with my metabolic flexibility goals. It's kind of like a test, and I hate the term biohacking, but it's a way to kind of test my resilience, because it makes sense in my head evolutionarily for me to be able to survive 3 days of it, going really skinny on the calories without being completely depressed or completely out of commission. And that mental clarity is super important to me. Being able to track my glucose and compare it to previous fasts that I've done, it's just kind of like a mental check that I do a couple of times a year. The first person that I ever heard talk about this was Dr. Michael Ruscio. So I have to credit him 100% because when you do an elemental diet, people tend to overdo it, and they can go, weeks, or doing like a GAPS diet, and they can go months eating nothing but bone broth. I like this approach of doing 3 days fast and clean. Doesn't tax your glands too much, and it helps you, kind of reset the system. He recommends doing either a bone broth fast or like the master cleanse, that water and cayenne pepper and maple syrup. So if you can't stand the taste of bone broth, you can do like a 3-day fast with the master cleanse mix. Always do it under the supervision of a doctor, and then have very clear goals on why you're doing it. Don't do it just because it's a challenge or because you heard someone, some dummy at a podcast saying that they were doing it. Be sure to have a clear reasoning, whether it's therapeutic, whether it's, maybe you have type 2 diabetes and you want a way to kind of minimize and starve the system and reduce your circulating fuel. So maybe if you're under the supervision of a doctor, doing a 3-day fast can be a good way of resetting the system. And take care of yourself. Make sure you're hitting those electrolytes. Make sure that you're not over exercising. Don't try to do Wendler 3-2-1 and a fast at the same time. and then experiment and just be safe with it.
So how are you going to break this fast? What are you going to eat?
Guess what I'm eating? So Adam came and visited, and he saw the ins and outs of my routine. Like I no holds bar.
Right.
It was like getting up at 6:30, getting to the office at 7:30, eating the same thing that I ate for dinner, for lunch, getting off at 5, heading home, working some more, sometimes staying up until 11 or midnight working, and then doing it over and over and over again. And as Adam can attest, my meals are pretty boring. So I usually eat like a piece of meat with a ton of veggies. And that's probably what I'm going to have. I'm probably going to have like a half a pound burger cooked with salt and some broccoli, California blend veggie mix. And that's it.
Not even ketchup or mustard on the side.
No, not even ketchup or mustard. It was really funny because
because I come there and I'm opening up your fridge. I go, Guillermo, where's your ketchup at? and yeah, guys, another thing that a bit of a tidbit is Guillermo he's not particular about his coffee. He loves his coffee and he's very serious about it. He weighs out his beans. He has a specific roast he likes. Everything is fresh. So if anybody who sees Dr. Ruiz or is a big fan of whatever he's doing, if you want to impress him, get him a nice blend of some sort of light roast coffee.
It's so funny because this is a ritual that I have every morning. Like I wake up, I measure my beans, I make my coffee. Maybe one day, maybe one of these days, I'll make a video on how do I make my coffee, because it's kind of crazy. And I fast in the mornings, and the only thing that I have is coffee. So instead of making eggs, I just make coffee. Now, Adam, on the other hand,
Yeah, I am. See, the thing is, my eating habits tend to be. I usually just eat 2 big meals a day. I eat breakfast, and then I don't really eat again until dinner. And the reason why I do that is because school keeps me so occupied that either I don't have time to eat during class, or I'm just so focused on my work that if I do take a break to eat, then I'll find 1,000 other distractions. That's when the social media comes out. That's when I check up on the scores of last night's game. That's when I check Facebook or talk to friends and whatnot. So if I don't bring a lunch, it kind of just forces me to do work, and then I can come home, enjoy a meal, and kind of relax. So it was kind of funny with Guillermo, who's always fasting. Here he is in the morning not eating anything, and I'm just absolutely ravenous for food.
Yeah, so we're driving towards work, and he goes, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna eat my lunch." He grabs the container. He grabbed the container. Like we're on the 101 going north, and he's just eating cold vegetables. and I don't remember what it was. Probably.
I think you just had like a beef patty.
Yeah, and he was just eating, like congealed fats, and just eating that patty with cold vegetables. Yeah, that was pretty funny, and oh man, we had fun, man. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it was a blast. Like I got to see the real Guillermo, and he really puts in his work to create really good content.
So it is so much fun to do all the stuff that we're doing. Adam has seen it. I really care about my patients and about my listeners. It is so neat to be able to, just like people ahead of me have helped me realize my goals, whether it's Keith Norris or whether it's Rob Wolf or Alan Christensen or all of the people that have platforms that have given me a chance. It is so cool to kind of turn around and then have a third-year medical student that is going to kill it once he graduates, and having him over and show him the ropes a little bit and giving him a different perspective of the things that can happen. Now, again, this is not like this is the way, it's just a different perspective, because there are medical students that want to do global health, and there are medical students that want to operate on a more natural medicine realm, and there are other students that want to do, that want to help people in chronic pain or with endocrinology like me, or there are so many different ways to achieve your dreams. And it was just cool to show Adam how things can work in a different perspective of the goal. So anyone out there listening, whether you want to become a naturopathic student, or whether you want to be a health coach, or whether you want to be a patient, or whether you want to just try to better your health, reach out. Just
Right.
Whether it's me, whether it's Adam, whether it's Triple Peak Paleo or Keith Norris, or so many people in this space, just reach out. I will do anything in my power to help you reach those goals.
Right. And, we talk about this all the time in our research program is find a mentor. And, once you find someone that you can click with and really show you the ropes and kind of just really guide you, it makes things a whole heck of a lot easier. And, just so many more opportunities open up for you. And I'm unbelievably grateful for the time that I was able to experience while in Arizona. And it was just incredibly priceless. So again, I just thank you so much.
Yeah, dude, and you open doors, and you always have a couch you can share with Arrow. So anytime you wanna, anytime you wanna come up and go eat some gluten-free cheeseburgers, let me know.
Awesome. All right. I'll talk to you later then, Guillermo.
Awesome, dude. Thank you.